The regular season is in the rearview mirror now, fellas, and it is time for postseason basketball all across the sport. This is Fielding the 68, presented by Rhythm as part of the Field of 68 network, and it is great to be with you. Selection Sunday, if you can believe it, is less than 1 week away. Paul Fritschner, and we are joined by the legends here. We have a couple of bracketologists. They're going to break down all of this. We have Rocco, we have Brad, and we have a whole new bracket to get to. We have a lot of movement here from the Big Ten up to the 4 line. We have some interesting stories, dynamics, things from the weekend that we got to recap. We have the bubble and everything else. But before we get to that, Brad, Rocco, how are you fellas?
I'm doing great, Paul. We're hitting the home stretch right here, and it's going to be awesome to see how everything turns out, just like it is every single year.
I agree,
Rocco?
Brad. It's one of the you could argue in a lot of ways this week and the week that we just experienced are in some ways better than actual March Madness. There's certainly more games to watch, as crazy as next week's going to be, and a lot more seasons are going to end this week than there will be next week. So if you like the big data like I do, there's a lot going on this week, a lot to track. There's action from noon Eastern basically every day starting Wednesday until the bitter end of the night. If you're on the East Coast, till maybe 2 a.m. So if you're drunk on college hoops, this week's for you.
well, let's look back at the weekend first because there's plenty of to talk about from some movement over the weekend. But just in general, let's take a look, as we always do to start the show, at the winners and the losers, who had great weekends, who didn't, since our last show on Friday afternoon. Brad, we'll start with you. Who was your biggest winner of the weekend?
Yeah, there were definitely a few of them. I'll start with Oklahoma at Texas. I think Oklahoma had to get that game. Obviously, conference record is not even on the team sheets. It doesn't matter per se. They're 6-12, which seems like a bit of an issue when you only win 33% of your conference games. But I thought winning at Texas was crucial for them to remain in the field. And then I would also say Indiana beating Ohio State. Indiana's metrics are in a decent position, but I wouldn't say, had they lost to Ohio State, they'd be right there on the cut line. So that was a very important game for them. And, obviously they still have the Big Ten tournament ahead of them, and they're going to need to, if they really want to boost their resume in a nice way, go ahead and take care of business against a team like Oregon, who's just playing as well as any other team in the Big Ten. And the last one I'll give you is just bubble teams in general had a good weekend. Drake won the Missouri Valley Conference tournament, which I think it's important to note because Drake, in all likelihood, would have been an at-large bid. So that's one fewer bid stealer to come off the board. And if you remember how things turned out last year, we had about 5 bid stealers in the last week of the season. So bubble teams, if you're in those last 4 in right now, you are certainly not safe.
Yeah, everybody was taking a deep breath when they saw Drake kind of make that little rally there toward the end of the second half and then really eventually put that game away. Rocco, your winners of the weekend.
Yeah, I think I'll start with the Kentucky Wildcats. So for me, it's been a big battle for that last 2 seed. I think we all agree on that. And Kentucky's certainly in the mix. They landed as the final 2 seed for me in my forecast today, mainly for a couple of reasons. One, we know from the bracket reveal the 3rd weekend of February that this committee was higher on Kentucky than a lot of us here on Fielding the 68. I've made that adjustment. They do bring a boatload of wins to the table. They've also lost 9 times. And if they are not the SEC tournament champions, they're going to bring 10 losses to the table by the end of the week. But they beat Duke. They've won at Missouri. That's the big win they just got. They already had the win at Tennessee. They got the win at Mississippi State. They have a lot of great wins. And it's tough, depending on what the committee prefers. And that's what we're trying to figure out here. Do you prefer just a 4-loss St. John's team with some good wins? Or do you prefer Kentucky, who's in the best conference with a boatload of great wins? So we'll have to see. But I leaned Kentucky for today. I'm going to continue to analyze that. I also thought Maryland, for the first time all year, they've cracked my protected seed list as one of the last number 4 seeds. It's a big breakthrough for them. They didn't schedule well for non-conference. In fact, one of the worst out of anybody in the field. but they've been able to pick up road wins down the stretch. Of course, that one at Michigan about a week ago. They finished up with a win over Northwestern at home, which wasn't like the big breakthrough, but they saw some other teams fall around them and were finally able to crack the list. They finished the year 7-1 in their last 8, and who knows, maybe the Terps are a big threat. They actually finished second in the Big Ten. They're the number 2 seed in Indianapolis, so really, really playing well at the perfect time. I also listed Oklahoma, and Brad covered that well. And then I'll say Arkansas. I thought if Arkansas had lost that home game to Mississippi State over the weekend, they were going to go right back into the very much at-risk category for even getting selected. Now that they got that win, obviously they're safer. I don't think it would be a good idea to lose early to South Carolina in their 9-16 matchup on Wednesday. But beyond that, if they can take care of South Carolina, they should be hearing their name called come Sunday.
So just since we're starting off the show, we're starting off conference tournament week, and I think this narrative has really taken hold over the last month or so where we've known about it. Everybody that goes through bracketology, we talk about it so much, but I think publicly it's starting to get more attention that what you do in conference tournament week doesn't matter as much to the committee as a lot of people would say that it does. Is that narrative as true as it sounds? I mean, it feels to me like you win a game or you win 2 games, you always hear people say, oh, they got to go to New York, they got to win 3, or you got to go to, Nashville, you got to win 3, or whatever that is. For people that are listening to this that are thinking, oh, my team has to go here and win this, does that really matter all that much? And how much does the committee play into it in the scope of the whole season?
Yeah, it's a good question, Paul. I think, it could, by the time we get to Sunday, it could look like that. So I think it's a very fair way to phrase it. I think the committee would tell you that they are considering all results that happened this week. But I think what the public needs to understand is they have a process they have to go through. So I just wrapped up a mock committee weekend myself, 4 straight days of voting, examining teams, bringing in results throughout Saturday, and then we put a bracket together yesterday as a group. And I think as part of that process, you're constantly looking at the data, comparing teams, and you have 95% of the information when you start, and then you're mixing in that one last result. So is that enough to move the needle? I think what ends up happening with the committee in a lot of cases is they just end up erring on the side of caution and not making a change to what they had already thoroughly decided. And that's why to the public, it starts to look like, that result didn't change anything. And in the end, the public's right about that. The result in the end didn't change anything, but it's also because of the chronological process. Now, the committee doesn't really convene and get into it till Wednesday morning. So SEC tournament games like the one I mentioned with Arkansas, Oklahoma's, I think, going to play Georgia that day as well. They're certainly going to be really early in the process when Wednesday happens and a lot of Thursday. So those 2 days, especially for bubble teams and some of the seeding, should still impact it. And then from Friday on, it's kind of a guessing game.
I think it's interesting looking at how this week could set up because we talk about the bid stealers. We talk about these teams right now as the bubble develops that are right on the cut line. And I know we'll talk more about the bubble later, but it's interesting looking at the AAC, the Americans Championship game, which is at 3:15 on Sunday afternoon. And I think that is a conference that is very ripe for a bid steal this year if Memphis doesn't win the American. And you're kind of thinking to yourself, if Memphis is playing in that title game, and they're bringing it right down to the wire, right at 5:30, 5:45 when that game is ending, and Memphis doesn't win the title game. Is your team or is my team or is whoever getting knocked out because whoever, Tulane or whoever it is upsets Memphis in the American title game? And those are all things that, they just create a couple of brackets and then send the one to CBS that ends up mattering. And then that's just how it goes, right?
Yeah, correct. And I think, go ahead, Brad. I'll let you take that one.
No, I was going to say, yeah, that's correct. And the committee is always going to have a contingency plan. So, as a bracketologist, we have our own contingency plan, and we're a member. We're just one group, one person in each group. Committee has a ton of people, so it's not that difficult for them to prepare in advance to figure out, if Memphis does not win their conference tournament, where the automatic bid will slide in, and where Memphis would end up should they go on and lose in the championship game. So the committee is always prepared. It's not like they're going to be scrambling at the last second right before Selection Sunday. Oh, we got to figure this out. No, it's not like that. They'll be prepared with a spot for where the automatic qualifiers should go, and the bracket will turn out the way they plan on having it be.
All right, let's go to the losers of the weekend. Brad, we'll keep it on you here. Your biggest losers of this weekend.
I think without a doubt, number one is Nebraska. Nebraska losing at home to Iowa. They really had a fall from grace, I guess you could say. I mean, they had some great wins this year, winning at Oregon. They won at Creighton. But for some reason, they just weren't the same team at Pinnacle Bank Arena as they've been in past years. They picked up a good number of losses at home. They lost to Minnesota. They lost to Rutgers down the stretch. They lost to USC. So a lot of these teams that are towards the bottom of the Big Ten standings, they lost to, including Iowa, that really cost them. So now they finish at 17-14 overall in the season, which isn't a particularly good overall record. And to top it off, they missed the Big Ten tournament. So they have no more games to improve their stock. There's nothing else they could do. It's rare enough where we see a team make the NCAA tournament while being just 3 games over 500. But the fact that they can't improve anything while other bubble teams are still playing and bid stealers are out there and all that, they put themselves in a terrible position where it's pretty much unlikely that they're going to be in the NCAA tournament. So that would be my number one biggest loser. Second one, I would go with Ohio State. Lost at Indiana. Look, I have Ohio State still in the field at the moment. We'll get to that later. But Ohio State is another team whose record is on the cusp of being a significant issue, as they're just 17-14 heading into the Big Ten tournament. Fortunately for their sake, they have some opportunities. They get to play Iowa, and then if they win, they get Illinois. So they're still, kind of in control of their own destiny. But they don't have much room for error, because if they lose that first game to Iowa, they finished the season at 17-15. And look, making the NCAA tournament while just being 2 games over 500, that doesn't happen very often.
Well, and to your point on Nebraska, if we're sitting here arguing about a team that can't even make their conference tournament to then potentially be in the NCAA tournament, I know that's not technically a disqualifier, but I mean, come on, right? If you can't make your conference tournament, what are we doing talking about the NCAA tournament, right? So, I think you're spot on with Nebraska.
Absolutely. And just one other point I want to add to that. So Nebraska, they finished tied for 12th. So they lost a ton of tiebreakers, which led them to missing the Big Ten tournament. Tied for 12th is still not good, but if you look at the SEC, look at teams that finished 13th or 14th, we have them in the NCAA tournament. So it's a little, I agree with you. You missed the tournament. You should not be in, but they lost a ton of tiebreakers. There's nuances. Yeah. They lost a ton of tiebreakers because they lost to a ton of those teams at the bottom of the Big Ten standings. So it's really their own undoing.
Rocco, your biggest losers of the weekend?
Yeah, I mean, I think Brad hit a home run by saying Nebraska. I don't think there's a bigger loser than that because Nebraska went from being considered for a bubble team. And hey, let's be honest, if they beat Iowa, they're kind of right back in the mix with a 500 meaningful record, might even slip into my field today. And they go from that to losing another home game and another game against a team that's not in the field or near the field. And they missed the entire Big Ten tournament and finish in 16th place. I mean, I cannot think of a bigger loser than we've had the entire season than that. But I'll go on to other teams. The Baylor Bears, again, not losing at home to Houston. Obviously, everybody does that, right? Because Houston's never lost a road game, so they just did what everybody else did. Here's the problem: since Josh Ajamuna went down, the Bears are 3-5, and he's done for the year. 6'10", 235-pound monster, and they just haven't been the same. You could see it in their play. The committee knows all this. And I think the audience needs to understand the committee has 12 members that are actively talking and voting. But when it comes to the bubble, there's a subcommittee of other staffers that are going under the hood on teams like Baylor, like Indiana, like Oklahoma, like Nebraska, Ohio State, etc. So everything about these teams are extra exposed. You see all the warts, and then you try to find the good. And I think the problem with Baylor is I think they're going to really be judged by these last 8 games, and then we'll see how they perform in the Big 12 tournament. Even though they lost the game, they still finished with the number 7 seed, which gets them a single bye. But I think it's a dangerous spot because they're playing the tournament in Kansas City. Kansas State's down the road. All their fans go every year. And if Kansas State wins the 10-15 game, they're going to be playing the Wildcats. And that's obviously a dangerous team. They had their hot streaks. We don't know which Kansas State we're going to see this week. But that's certainly a game Baylor could conceivably lose. I think if they lose that game, they're going to be in the Crown tournament right here in Las Vegas. Because of the fact that entering the week right now, Paul, the Bears are 12-13 in meaningful games. So you could already leave them out right now if you want to. I left them in for today, but I think that loss would be a TKO. Now, if they win that first game and get to the 7-2 game, they'll play obviously a very good team at that point, might be okay to advance. But I think this Baylor Bears team's in a lot more trouble than a lot of the people are talking about. We had great conversations about them throughout the weekend. So that's, to me, a loser, just because if they would have won against Houston, that conversation would have gone away. Now they can't avoid it. Purdue, for me, also a little bit of a loser. On Friday night, they lost to Illinois in a game where, it's just another loss. And the reason I bring up Purdue is these are like unseen things. I think we all think of Purdue as still a very good team, probably worthy of a protected seed. I think our consensus actually will have them there later today. However, you look at Purdue in quad 1 now, they're 7 for 16. They're losing more than they're winning in quad 1. And they also have a quad 2 loss to go on top of that. Then you go to their record away from home, whether it's top 2 quads or everything away from Mackey, and they have a losing record in both categories. So now they're almost like de facto disqualified from protected seed if you can find a better option. So I think the Boilermakers hurt themselves just by taking on another loss. They've lost quite a bit since the reveal. The last team I'll mention as well is Marquette. Again, I'm mentioning these 3 because they're not obvious losers. Marquette just they've taken 3 losses since the reveal. They were mentioned by Bubba Cunningham, the chairman, as one of the teams just outside of the protected seeds that day. But what they've done is they've leaked a lot of oil. Even in the games they've won, they haven't looked as sharp in the last month. I think even Marquette fans would admit that. And now they're in this big group of teams between the end of the 5 line all the way down to the 8 line, where it's really hard to slot them. And they barely held on as a 7 seed for me today, Paul. So that's not good for your Xavier boys, because your Xavier boys need Marquette to be really good. You're playing them in a couple of days, and you're in the top of your resume is the road Marquette win, and they've definitely been leaking oil.
Yeah, it's kind of a catch-22 on Thursday with playing Marquette and then Marquette taking another loss, if that was to happen, if Xavier was to win that game. But that's down the road. We'll talk about that more in a second. But the 1 seeds from Friday's show stayed the same. So I want to talk about a few things here. We can quickly touch on these 1 seeds: Auburn, Duke, Houston, Florida. Either one of you, anything here? These are the same 4 teams we had on Friday's show.
Yeah, I mean, I just think Florida belongs above Houston, but I know it's really close. Florida has the 2 best road wins, at least the duo of road wins of anybody in the country, at Auburn and at Alabama. Houston has the perfect road record of 10-0. So they're both pretty awesome. But I think in Florida's case, they didn't take a quad 2 loss. Houston did. They also have 1 extra quad 1A win versus Houston in comparison. So it's really close. Then I think if the committee ends up close, which is kind of how I'm playing it out in my mind, it's a little bit more logical to send Houston West and Florida to Midwest, in a perfect world. I know David Warlock, I hope you're watching. We've talked about this, but I think at the end of the day, Florida belongs above Houston for those differences.
Okay. Brad, anything more to add there?
Yeah, I don't have an issue with that whatsoever. I think one other thing to touch on, I think Alabama is still alive for a number 1 seed, as is Tennessee. There's a potential for an Alabama-Florida matchup in the semifinals of the SEC tournament that could play a role in the final number 1 seeds. I think the only disadvantage that Alabama has right now is the fact that they've they've accumulated a ton of losses. They have 7 losses right now compared to Florida having 4. Houston has 4. Even Tennessee has fewer than that. But I think when it comes down to it, total collection of really good wins, Alabama is right there. But right now, those 4 number 1 seeds is where I'm at as well.
All right, let's take a look now at the protected seeds. One thing I want to touch on is St. John's, because they moved up to a 2 seed, but they have to go west. And I think that's something that's really interesting to look at, where, I had a St. John's podcaster on my daily show the other day, and we were talking about this same thing. Would you rather be a lower seed or a higher seed, whatever you want to say? Would you rather be that 3 seed and stay out east, or would you rather get a better seed but have to travel? It's kind of interesting for the team kind of thinking that one through with the fan base and everything else. But St. John's getting that bump up to a 2 seed feels deserved for a team that just went on the road, beat Marquette, Big East champions, only 4 losses on the season by I think a combined 7 points. This is a really, really good St. John's team.
I think without question, if you're St. John's, you would prefer that 3 seed. You want to be in the East. You want to be able to play in Providence for a couple games and then go play in Newark, right outside of New York City, in your Sweet 16 and Elite 8 games with the chance to go to the Final Four, because they'll pack that arena. So it's an interesting scenario, because it's not like you want to lose a game and slip up in the Big East tournament, but if I'm them, I'm almost like, let's go win the Big East tournament, and let's put a phone call to the selection committee and say, hey, you know what? Just keep us on the 3 line. We'll be okay right there.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you on that. To be able to go to, what would that be, Providence, and then over to Newark, right? I mean, to be able to do that would be, to me at least, the ideal scenario, wouldn't it, Rocco?
It would be ideal, and they St. John's isn't a 2 seed for my projection yet. They're one of the strongest 3s, of course, as mentioned at the beginning. But here's the problem with the 3 seeds right now is the Big 12 and the Big 10, as you'll see on our forecast as a consensus later, have a bunch of teams in the protected seeds. So when you're a protected seed, you have to go to separate regions. So what ended up happening for me is I started the process with St. John's in the East, but because there's too many Big 12 teams, I had to switch them with Iowa State, because that's what the policies require. And that made St. John's go to the Midwest to Indianapolis and sent Iowa State to the East, because I needed a Big 12 team in the East. And if these Big 12 teams and these Big 10 teams keep clogging the 3 and 4s, St. John's is just going to have to, because St. John's is the only Big East team in the mix. So they're just going to get whatever's left over at that point. And so unfortunately for the Red Storm, unless some of these Big 10 and Big 12 take a bad loss early in their tournament and fall out of the top 4 entirely of the seed lines, St. John's is at the mercy of where these other teams from the bigger conferences get slotted. And that's what happened today.
Well, to your point, Rocco, the 4 seed line by fielding the 68 is entirely Big 10 teams right now. We can talk about that. Maryland, they move up to a 4 seed. Wisconsin gets bumped down to a 4 seed, and all of a sudden, the entire 4 line has become the Big 10.
Exactly. Yeah, and so that limits the flexibility. For me, I still had Arizona as one of my last 4s from the Big 12. Of course, Texas Tech and Iowa State are very strong. 3 seed projections for me, and we already covered Houston being a 1. So they all have to be in separates. And then you have all those Big 10 teams at the bottom. So there's zero flexibility. Like I'm saying, St. John's has to take the leftovers. But I've got great news, Red Storm fans. As I've been telling you for 4 weeks, I hope you bought all the tickets in Providence, because you're definitely going to Providence no matter what. And your 3-14 and your 3 versus 6 or 3 versus 11 games won't be walks in the park. So there are no guarantees of the Sweet 16. Enjoy Providence. Have a great weekend next weekend. And wherever you go after that, you're going to love it no matter what.
There we go. There's the sell job from Rocco Miller. We like that. Brad, looking at that 4 line, just all Big 10 teams. I know I don't want to say unprecedented, but it is kind of crazy looking at how it's working out right now.
No question. And look, it's it's unlikely to end up that way. There's still Big Ten tournament play. Everybody has a chance to move up a seed if they can make a nice little run in their conference tournament. But yeah, Wisconsin kind of put a wrench in this whole thing. Losing to Penn State at home. They last week, towards the middle to end of last week, they were my last number 2 seed, hanging on a thread. They were more like the last 2 or top 3, but this knocked them down a considerable amount. They're now just 6-7 against quad 1 opponents. But look, these teams can. We'll see if any of these teams can separate themselves a little bit, or some are going to lose and probably drop a seed, and maybe even more depending on how all these other teams in their seed vicinity do.
Plenty more to talk about here on Fielding the 68. And when we come back from this break, it is time to talk about the bubble. Last 4 in, first 4 out, next 4 out. Who can make up ground here in this final week before Selection Sunday? All of that and more on the other side of the break. This is Fielding the 68 presented by Rhythm.
College basketball fans, are you ready to take your hoops game to a new level? Whether you're a seasoned bettor or just trying to win your March Madness office pool, Rhythm is here to give you the edge this season. With data-driven predictions for every single college basketball game left on the schedule, Rhythm helps you maximize your bets. And as March Madness kicks off, Rhythm's insights will help you spot those plucky Cinderellas that you know are going to shake up the NCAA tournament. But that's not all. When Selection Sunday rolls around, let Rhythm's AI-powered bracket generator do the heavy lifting for you. This is the same AI tool that performed 35% better than the average ESPN bracket last year. And here's the best part. Rhythm pairs perfectly with our Field of 68 expert analysis, giving you the 1-2 punch that you need for the rest of the college basketball season. So don't wait. Download Rhythm today and get ready to see college basketball and your betting results in a whole new light. I want my home to feel like my home. So whether I'm looking for big furniture, just a small piece for my place, or maybe some storage solutions for the basement or the garage, the answer is Wayfair. Seriously, I needed a new patio set and fire pit for my backyard. I bought it on Wayfair. It looks great on our deck, and it gives me an excuse to fire up the smoker, invite some friends over, crack a couple beers. Just last week, I bought a new chair for my office, someplace comfortable to sit while the madness takes up the 4 screens in front of me. I got it on Wayfair, clicked a few buttons. A couple days later, it showed up at my front door. They even offered to help set it up for you. Digging through online stores can be intimidating. Trust me, I know. It can be hard to find what you're looking for in your price range, but not on Wayfair. They have great options, even if you are balling on a budget like me. Wayfair has every style for every home, including mine and yours. So head to wayfair.com and shop everything home. That's WAYFAIR.com. Wayfair, every style, every home.
Welcome back to Fielding the 68, presented by Rhythm. Access expert-backed predictions for every remaining college basketball game, from rivalries to sleeper matchups. Don't wait. Download Rhythm today and transform how you bet, bracket, and enjoy college basketball. What captivates bracketology for a lot of teams and a lot of fans is who is right on that cut line. And as we get into conference tournament week, that's what we're going to talk about right now. Who has work to do and who is right on the edge? It's time to talk about the bubble and the last 4 in. We're going to go to Brad, you first, for your last 4 into the NCAA tournament as of today.
Yep. So my last 4 in, we're going to start with Indiana, who we touched base on a little bit earlier. Picked up a very big win at home against Ohio State. Indiana has kind of turned the corner over the last couple of weeks, and in Mike Woodson's final goodbye, maybe they're playing for Mike Woodson down the stretch, whatever it might be. They're looking pretty good for a bid for the NCAA tournament. 47 strength of record, 52 net, isn't particularly great, which is why Dayton is where they're going to be for the moment. I think they're going to need to beat Oregon to get out of Dayton. And if they lose to Oregon, their chances of reaching the tournament they're not a lock. So things are still up in the air. But Dayton would be where they end up should they lose. And if they win just one Big Ten game, they're right on the cut line between Dayton and just missing Dayton. Oklahoma is my next team. 41 strength of record. Their overall resume metrics are not bad. 35 WOB. They're just 2-7 on the road, which is an issue, but 5-0 in neutral games, including their great non-conference wins of Arizona, Michigan, and Louisville. They play Georgia in the SEC tournament. Lose that game, and they could definitely finish in Dayton. If they can win that game, there's a chance they get themselves out of Dayton. So there's definitely still a lot on the line, and plus there's bid stealers. So by no means is Oklahoma a lock right now. And then next up is Ohio State. Ohio State has big wins at Purdue, and they beat Kentucky on a neutral court. They beat Texas on a neutral court. So they have the wins, but they're just 9-14 against quad 1 and 2 opponents with a 51 strength of record. So if they lose in the first round of the Big Ten tournament to Iowa, it's not looking good. There's a good chance they'll miss the NCAA tournament should they lose that game. And then finally, my last team in the field is Xavier. Xavier has just done what they've needed to do down the stretch. They just keep winning. While most of those wins aren't against NCAA tournament teams, aside from their win against Creighton, they've done what they needed to do. They're just 1-8 against quad 1 opponents, but they do have 3 wins over the field, including, as Rocco mentioned earlier, that huge win at Marquette. And they also beat Creighton and UConn. A 40 strength of record is solid. That KPI of 59 is a little bit of an outlier, I feel like, on their resume. I'm not too concerned. And also not having any bad losses, I think, is a feather in their cap as well. They play Marquette in their first game in the Big East tournament. Look, if you could win that game, they'll be feeling pretty good about their chances of making the NCAA tournament.
Rocco, your last 4 in.
Yeah, so back to that Baylor team. I gave you a sneak preview earlier, but I just think the committee would be somewhat divided on them after everything gets exposed about the injury, about how they've played since the injury, and of course that record being 1 game under 500 in effective results, meaningful games is the term I use. I think they're really at risk, especially if they lose that first game this week. There's probably a good chance they'll be out of the field for me come Selection Sunday. And I think it's pretty easy as well. Like Brad was mentioning on some of the other teams, once bids, if and when bids do get stolen throughout the week, these 4 that you're looking at on the screen are what I call repeal teams. So these will be the first teams to be repealed. And I think if Baylor does win a game this week, they'll probably get out of this group. They were a stronger 10 based on their what I call the danger rating, which is kind of more in line with the Ken Palm and the net. Because, they do have strong ratings in those areas, but that has nothing to do with their resume. So when they get into seeding, they might be able to get back up to the 10 due to that. And then I agree with Brad as far as Dayton teams on Xavier and Oklahoma. He did a good job covering that. I would just add on the Sooners, I'm not all the way sold. I thought that game at Texas was very strange. I watched it. Texas body language was weird. And Oklahoma, at the end of the day, is just 2-7 in their 9 road games. They didn't schedule 1 in non-conference play. And I get that they won the Battle for Atlantis and picked up the Jumpman Invitational win over Michigan. Awesome stuff in those games. But in the SEC, they've been very inconsistent. Obviously, we know what their conference record is. That's not necessarily discussed, but I think the room knows that. So I think Oklahoma's just in the danger zone for that. And I don't know if there's that much they can do this week to change that. Obviously, beating Georgia won't hurt. And then last, I've got the UC Irvine Anteaters as my last team in. And again, I think for Irvine to actually get in at large, I think they're going to have to get to the Big West Finals. The Big West did a great job by giving both UC San Diego and the Anteaters, top 2 teams in the league, obviously, a bye to the semis. So that's just going to require a win. Easier said than done. They are on the same side of the bracket as UC Riverside, who has the best point guard in the league in Barrington Hargress. That tournament is going to be off the hook all week here in Vegas. Make sure you watch the Big West. But I'll tell you what, Paul, the UC Irvine has a quad 1A road win. Most of the bubble does not, especially if they're a mid-major. They have a quad 1A road win against the field, and they have 17 wins away from home, leading the country. They have 14 true road wins, leading the country. And at a certain point, you got to stop ignoring the Anteaters. It's way more impressive than a lot of the power conference mush. And this year's committee has 7 non-power conference representatives and just 5 power conference. So if there's ever a year for Irvine to make a case, this is the year. So we'll see how that plays out. But I think they absolutely have earned it. And they play with a real toughness about them, coming back from down 17 the other night, winning at UC Santa Barbara.
And what do you always say, Rocco? What's the line? 17 wins away from home. What does the committee always think about?
Who did you play? Where did you play? And how did you do? And all but 9 of Irvine's games have been away from Irvine, Paul.
There it is. The Anteaters, the Big West, a 2-bid league for Rocco Miller. A 2-bid league. How confident let me ask you this, Rocco. We sit here on Monday. They're in your last 4 in. How confident are you that at 6:45 on Sunday night, the Big West is a 2-bid league?
I think the best scenario for the Big West is quite clear. Irvine wins the tournament, and UC San Diego loses to Irvine, in a great game. And I think UC San Diego, of course, a little bit more qualified. They have the win at Utah State, one of only 2 teams to win there. That's a team cleanly in the field. And then they do have the big win at Irvine themselves. So these two did a great job winning at each other's home floor to make all this very interesting. But I think, UC San Diego's credentials are stronger than Irvine. So for the league, that's what you need. And again, for today, and because we don't have a bid steal yet, I'm including Irvine as my final team in the field.
All right, let's do the consensus last 4 in. Take a look at this. Indiana, Oklahoma, Xavier, and Ohio State. So Xavier, Indiana appearing, and I believe Oklahoma appearing in all 3, all 3 of these. I could be wrong there, trying to do the mental math going back real quick. But Xavier, looking at the Musketeers and what they have in front of them this week, I'll ask the question. You knew I was going to ask the question. Xavier with an opportunity on Thursday against Marquette. I know we prefaced all of this in the opening segment about how much does the committee care about the conference tournaments and all of that, but it would double the Musketeers' quad 1 win total, which I think is significant. Do you think, and either one of you can take this, do you think that Marquette game is essentially a win and in situation? And on the flip side, if they were to lose, is there enough breathing room that Xavier still could hear their name called on Selection Sunday with a loss to Marquette?
Say a win. I wouldn't call them a lock with a win. I would say likely in, just because, again, last year we had 5 bid stealers. So there are still a lot of variables out there that we just don't have the answers to. So I wouldn't call them a lock. I would say they're in pretty good shape with a win. And I think the committee, they'll be doubling their Q1 win totals. But I think it's important to note that their wins against UConn and Creighton, those are almost borderline Q1 wins. So if that happened to, if you see their resume and you say, oh, well, they have 4 Q1 wins, well, they're definitely in. So I think and the committee does it. You got to look deeper than just looking at the quadrant numbers and seeing who they've beaten, what teams they've beaten in the field. I think more importantly, having that 4th win over a team in the field will really help Xavier's chances of getting a bid. And I don't think a loss eliminates them. I think they are at the, suddenly, you got to see how other bubble teams perform. Is Ohio State losing? Does Arkansas lose to South Carolina? Does Baylor lose? What's going on with North Carolina and Texas and, some of these other teams? So I would say I would feel pretty good about Xavier's chances if they beat Marquette. I would say they still have some hope with a loss in a close loss. I think there's a chance, and it's just going to be kind of a wait and see how the rest of the bubble performs.
Rocco, anything to add there?
Yeah, I would just add the downside. If they lose to Marquette, I think it's a big problem because then you're 1-9 against Q1, and then all your other records get affected too. So right now they're 9-10, top 2, which still isn't great. Then you go to 9-10 to 9-11. So anytime you're already on the bubble, you already have the warts. Like I said, you're adding any kind of loss after that, kind of like with Baylor losing to Houston, that other example. You're just you're compounding the problems. So that makes the Marquette game more of a must win because the downside of losing is even greater.
Okay, let's do the first 4 out teams right on the wrong side of the cut line right now. Rocco, you first for your first 4 out.
Yeah, so I'm going to start with the Tar Heels. I think they're probably the committee's most interesting team. I think we all know why. We know who the chairman is. And, quite honestly, they're playing much better the last couple of weeks. They just don't have the opportunity to get the wins unless they got the big one over Duke. They didn't. They led the game for a while, which, most teams don't even have the lead against Duke. And their only bad loss, their record in quad one is awful, like 1-11. And I just don't think that win percentage gets you in, which is why they're still out. And they have the bad loss at home against Stanford, but they beat everybody else. I think if they play well this week in the ACC tournament, I think they're in the same bracket as Wake Forest. That would be a loser out kind of game. Wake is somehow still hanging around. But both those teams are the 2 in the ACC tournament, in my opinion. I know we'll break that down in the next segment. But those 2 are the 2 in the ACC tournament that have, NBA level talent. You have to have like the athletes to hang with Duke, and Carolina clearly does. And because they just don't have a ton of bad on their resume, they're still there. And the committee dynamics are just going to be fascinating for this team. So I'm not naive to that. The next team I have is Dayton. Dayton got the huge win at VCU on Friday. And I think, a lot of us forgot just how, good those Dayton wins were early in the year. Of course, beating UConn and Maui, and they have a home win over Marquette. Now, whatever you think of VCU is fine. That you might have them just in, just out if they were in the at-large pool. But that gives them 3 very interesting wins. Right now, VCU road win, according to the net, is a quad 1A. So that's a very strong road win to anchor those other 2 wins against the Big East that I mentioned with. Now, of course, they lost at UMass. They lost at George Washington and Loyola Chicago. They have to own those losses. But I think when you're on the bubble, and again, like I said earlier, there's a subcommittee just going under the hood on all these bubble teams. You're looking for a team that has proven they can beat teams above the bubble. And you could argue at this moment in time that the Flyers have proven that 3 times. And so they're very interesting. And I don't think that conversation is going to die quickly in the committee room. So I list them second here. Up next, we have the San Francisco Dons. And I'll be honest, I cover the Dons, and they've got Marcus Williams, one of their star players, suspended indefinitely. Played really well last night to get to tonight. If they don't beat Gonzaga tonight, the conversation's probably gone. But if they do, like all their numbers are good. They haven't taken a bad loss this year. They have a win over St. Mary's. So a win tonight would give them wins over the 2 top dogs in the league. They beat Boise State by double digits in the beginning of the year. So I think the Dons are still very relevant and very interesting, especially you have to consider, Paul, the WCC tournament will be completely over by the time the committee meets on Wednesday morning, which is why this league always has a nice advantage for seeding. And if there is ever a bubble team, San Francisco did get in a couple of years ago. So we know that. And then last, Boise State. Boise State was the last team in on Friday. We knew what happened on Friday night. Took that tough home loss to Colorado State. They still have the wins that they had. The wins weren't overly impressive because a lot of the all the field level wins are in Idaho, either home or the one against St. Mary's in Idaho Falls. Obviously very pro Bronco advantages. So you just like to see them do a little bit more away from home. Plus they lost to Boston College and they lost to Washington State. That just kind of muddies things up. But Boise State, obviously a live dog in this Mountain West tournament coming up.
Rocco, just from a logistics standpoint, you talk about Bubba Cunningham being the chair of the selection committee this year, and obviously North Carolina is right there on the bubble. For people that don't know how the just process works, they're supposed to step out of the room when they're talking about their own teams. Do they have to step out of the room when they're talking about their own conferences? Like, how does the logistics of the selection room work?
That's correct. Yeah. So if you're the commissioner of a conference, we have the Sun Belt commissioner this year. We have the Big Sky commissioner and maybe a couple others. WCC commissioner Stu Jackson.
Yeah, Stu Jackson's on it. Yep.
Yeah, I'm going to be talking to him in a couple hours. Anyway, so that's a great question. If anybody in the WCC, for Stu Jackson's sake, he has to leave the room. So in Bubba's case, if it's Clemson, North Carolina, obviously Duke, Louisville, he'll be removed from the discussion. Now, you got to think about it from a practical standpoint. This is what I've always said. Like, these guys are together for 4 days. They've been doing Zoom calls all season long. They were on Zoom calls all last weekend. You become friends after a while. You start to kind of pull for each other. There's a natural committee dynamic. It's like unspoken thing, but it's just human nature. You know, like if me, you, and Brad were stuck in a room for 4 days, I would like to think that we would love each other by the end of those 4 days, and we might try to take care of each other a little bit. So that's my point.
We wouldn't be stuck, Rocco. It'd be a privilege. Brad, your first 4 out.
Yep. So my first 4 out, I have a couple of the same as Rocco. So just touching base once more on Boise State. They're my first team out. That loss to Colorado State really hurt them. And to compound that, when Nevada got blown out at San Diego State, that hurt them as well, because that took away one of their Nevada was 76 in the net heading into that game. If Nevada would have come away with that upset, that could have been another quad 1 plus another quad 2 win for Boise State. So their entire weekend changed over the span of 24 to 48 hours. I do think they're still alive, though. And they have the wins against St. Mary's on a neutral court. They beat Clemson. They beat New Mexico. They beat Utah State. They have some really good wins. Wins over the field, very important. And the way the Mountain West Conference tournament shapes up, it's a good thing for Boise State. They get to play San Diego State in their first game. And if they win that game, they have a potential matchup against New Mexico. I think if they could win, probably need to win 2 games. I don't know if one is going to do enough, but I think one kind of puts them in the mix for sure. But the opportunities are there. And I think when you're a team from a non-power league, I think that's all you could ask for at this point. And then next up, Nebraska. Look, I touched base on them. There's nothing they can do to improve their resume. So they're second out in my field, but that's as high as they're going to be. Then there's Texas, coming off a home loss to Oklahoma, 57 strength of record, 60 KPI. They did win at Mississippi State. They beat A&M. They beat Kentucky, but they're just 8-14 against quad 1 and 2 opponents. But they have opportunities. They get Vanderbilt in their first game. They have to win that game. And then if they can beat Vanderbilt, they'll get Texas A&M. And then if they can beat Texas A&M right there, I think they'll be right there for a potential bid. So they're still alive and kicking, but no room for error. And then UC Irvine, of course, Rocco, talked about perfectly. They have to make it to the Big West Championship game and lose to UC San Diego in order to really have any chance for an at-large bid. But that road neutral record is something the committee will certainly it's certainly going to wow them, and I think should absolutely put them in play for a bid.
Yeah, so the big difference there between you guys was Irvine. But Rocco, let's move it over. We already did yours. So let's go to the consensus first 4 out here. We have Irvine, Boise, North Carolina, and Colorado State hanging right there on the edge. Anything more that we haven't talked about from this group that you guys want to get to before we go to the next 4 out?
I think Colorado State. Go ahead, Rocco. You're good. Go ahead.
We were going to say the same thing. I was going to tackle Colorado State as well. I first of all, I'll say this. I think they're best positioned to win the Mountain West tournament. I believe that. I think from them getting the 2 seed, their path is really, really good. And I've been watching this league. I covered this league. The last month of the year, they're the best team in the league. The metrics show that they beat the daylights out of Utah State. They won at Boise, pretty convincingly on Friday. They're coming in with the hot hand. So they can handle their business much like New Mexico did last year. But I think from a resume at large profile standpoint, they're just a little bit short. They have only the 1 quad 1 win. That win, sorry, they have 2 now with the win at Boise. But my point is, against the field, it's really within the Mountain West. What I've learned about the committee over the last handful of years with the Mountain West being up to this level is if you only build your profile within the Mountain West, they tend to frown upon it. And that's what makes Boise, to Brad's point, more interesting, because they beat Clemson, they beat St. Mary's. CSU didn't quite honestly get that. And plus, they hurt themselves. They lost on a half-court shot to UC Riverside at home. That crushes their resume. And then they handily lost to Washington. Shout out to my Huskies. earlier in the year when Washington was playing okay. But the way that it aged was not good, right? So they just, unfortunately for their at-large profile, I feel like they're my fifth team out, so I'm close to the consensus. But I just don't see a real path because I think they played Nevada in their first game is the best team they could play, and then in the next round they could get Utah State again. But by then it's going to be really late on Friday night, so you know how the committee plays out. One win over Utah State late Friday, I don't think that's going to push them up 5 spots. Plus, you have bid steals. So I just don't see a path. Unfortunately for the Rams, I don't see a path unless they cut down the nets right here. Thomas and Mack Center Saturday. Make sure you watch.
I'll tell you one thing. Nobody is a bigger fan of Rocco Miller than the Las Vegas Chamber of Commerce on the Fielding the 68 show right now. I'll tell you what. He's selling conference tournaments all over the place. All right, let's go to the consensus next 4 out here. Dayton, Texas, Wake, and Nebraska. So it feels to me, fellas, like Nebraska, that's a pretty good idea there, that Nebraska, they can't do anything to help themselves. They're on the outside looking in, and that's where they're going to stay. This is the first time we've mentioned Wake. We've already talked a little bit about Texas. We've definitely covered Dayton. Is there anything you guys want to add on Wake going into the ACC tournament?
Yeah, just in terms of Wake Forest, they have a 42 strength of record, which is very strong. But the problem in their situation is they just have 1 win over the field right now. That's on a neutral court against Michigan. So obviously you got to beat North Carolina, and then I think you get Duke. You need to have to win that game. So I think they're slim chances. Slim chances for them. It's a slim chance. I can't speak, but it's a slim chance. They're 8-8. They're 8-8 against quad 1 and 2 opponents, but they do have 2 bad losses. So they're alive, but they're going to have to win multiple games in order to have a shot.
Yeah, and I think real quick on that, Brad, Wake got the 4 seed, which in some ways, I guess it doesn't really matter because beating Notre Dame or Pittsburgh wouldn't help them anyway. But they are on the same side of the bracket as Duke, which you at least want the opportunity. Obviously, the last time they played them, it got ugly at the end. But if they get to Friday, so they have a bye till Thursday, so they can play North Carolina on Thursday, and that would be on a neutral court. North Carolina, I believe, is a quad 1. So that would be whoever wins that game, they're going to get a little bit of a boost, even though it's not against a tournament level team. Most likely, it's still a boost. And then you probably get a crack at Duke Friday, 7 p.m. Eastern, out there in the ACC tournament in Charlotte. So whoever gets that crack at Duke on Friday, the committee might hold their breath just for a moment to see if one of them can beat Duke.
All right. Anything more on the bubble that we haven't talked about before we go to a break? I'll leave the door open. Anything? I think that was a pretty good segment there on the bubble. But anything got to get off your chest?
I'll just say Nebraska's dead to me. I took them off my chart. And the reason why, I don't disagree with Brad. They've been in for a lot of this process, which is just kind of crazy, but they lost all those games down the stretch, and now they can't play anymore. They're done. They're not even going to the Big Ten tournament. So Nothing's going to change, and it's just crazy. I don't mean to be hard on Nebraska. I like a lot of the people there. We have a lot of friends there and stuff, but it's just, talk about playing yourself out. That's the perfect example.
Yep. All right. One more segment to go on Fielding the 68. We will talk a little bit more about some conferences as we close up this show when we come back here on Fielding the 68, presented by Rhythm.
If you haven't heard by now, we have partnered with BetMGM for the season. We'll be using BetMGM lines to make all of our picks, and we'll have special offers for the listeners and the viewers. Download the BetMGM app and sign up using the bonus code FIELD. Deposit at least $10 and place your first wager on any game, and you'll receive up to $1,500 in bonus bets. Go download the BetMGM app and use the code FIELD today. Now is your chance to prove you're smarter than the field of 68. We're hosting a Survivor contest with our partner Splash Sports. There's a $25 entry fee, a 25 entry max in the contest, and more than 1,700 spots available, which means there's a $40,000 max prize for the winner. Survivor is the future of March Madness. Each day you pick a team to win. If they win, you advance. We'll also be running a free to enter bracket contest as well as a second chance Survivor in the Sweet 16. So prove you know more ball than the field of 68 on Splash Sports. As teams are fighting to get off the bubble and into the field of 68, I got a beverage for you that's been off the bubble since day one. Dad Water. No bubbles, no fizz, just a smooth, refreshing canned cocktail unlike anything else on the market today. If you're tired of the same old beers and seltzers on game day, crack open something different. Dad Water is made with tequila, water, and natural flavors. Nothing artificial, no BS. It's 100 calories, zero sugar, zero carbs, gluten-free, so if you're on a diet like me, you're good to go. Dad Water is also an Indiana brand. College Hoops is in its DNA, and they want you to enjoy a great lineup of products all tournament long. Dad Water is the ultimate game time drink with no bubbles. It just drinks like water. Clean, smooth, refreshing, and without those burps. So take it from me. This is the easiest drinking adult beverage I've ever had. Dad Water is now available at Target, Total Wine and Liquor, and Meijer, as well as your favorite local liquor stores. Or you can order online at drinkdadwater.com. Dad Water, tequila, water, natural flavor.
Welcome back to Fielding the 68, presented by Rhythm. On Selection Sunday, use Rhythm's bracket generator, proven to perform 35% better than the average ESPN bracket. Don't wait. Download Rhythm today and transform how you bet, bracket, and enjoy college basketball. Paul Fritschner, Brad Wachtel, Rocco Miller with you. And to finish up this show, as we get toward 6 o'clock Eastern time, I know Rocco has some games to get to, probably another conference tournament moving to Las Vegas here this year that he's gonna find his way to tonight. But we'll start in the ACC, and I'll leave the door open, like I said at the end of last segment, for you guys to talk about which teams in each one of these conferences have the most to gain this week in their conference tournaments. Start with the ACC.
Yep. So in the ACC, of course, we touch base on it. North Carolina and Wake Forest, in terms of teams that are on the bubble, are going to need to win multiple games to get back in play. As far as teams that are not bubble teams in that league, Duke is looking good for a number 1 seed, regardless of how they end up finishing up in the ACC tournament. And then Clemson and Louisville, I think. You look at those two teams, you look at their conference records, and they both have unbelievable conference records. But, the ACC is just a 3-bid league at the moment. So you'd like to see a little bit more. You'd like to see those teams make some deep runs and in an ideal world, knock off, each other or beat a Duke. I think right now I have Clemson as a 5 seed at the moment, and I think there's still a little bit of room for them to improve, potentially getting to a 4 seed if they make a nice little run. And then Louisville's just 4-5 against quad 1 opponents. So for me, they're hanging around that 7 seed line, and I think it could go either way. You look at who they've actually beaten. They've beaten Clemson, they've beaten Indiana and West Virginia on neutral courts. That's it in terms of teams that are in the field. I'm not discounting the type of season they've had, because they've had an unbelievable season, especially compared to what they've done over the last couple of years. But the ACC is so down that some more quality wins, if they're able to get one more, I think would help them, potentially move up another seed line.
Rapid fire here, Rocco. We'll go to you for the Big 12.
Yeah, of course. Like I said earlier, the Keys Baylor, Kansas State, Arizona State is the teams in their bracket. So they get the winner of that on Wednesday. If it is Kansas State, they'll probably be favored to win. That's dangerous, of course, playing in Kansas City. Kansas State has nothing to lose. They're trying to win the whole tournament. And I think if Baylor takes that loss, they're in a lot of trouble. Outside of that, the rest of the tournament, there's a lot of teams trying to get hot. BYU's on fire right now. We'll see if they bring it. A lot of these teams who are already in, it's hard to know how much their needle's going to move, how much the committee's actually going to take into account. But I think there's some teams like a BYU or an Iowa State, for example, that just want to go there and prove it to themselves that they can win the whole tournament. So I expect you'll see maybe one of those teams get on fire, maybe even Kansas. Kansas trying to revitalize their season. They might go there and play pretty well in their backyard.
Brad, we'll bounce it back to you for the Big East.
Yeah, so the Big East, of course, we talked about Xavier and Marquette. Huge game for Xavier. Need to get that one and have the opportunity to play St. John's to really lock up a bid for sure if they could beat St. John's as well. I will also say I don't think there's enough there for Villanova to do to get back and play for a bid. Unfortunately, it's not happening. And then finally, St. John's, like, go win the Big East tournament, go get the best seed you possibly can. If that's what you want to do, they could definitely end up as a 2 seed. And the magical run could continue.
It's funny you bring up Villanova because the Tulip talked about this on After Dark on Saturday. And I was doing a podcast earlier. Somebody else brought it up that it's unlikely to happen, sure. But if there's a team that kind of fits that mold of NC State last year, maybe is that Villanova, right? With a talented scorer, a pretty talented backcourt, a coach potentially coaching for his job, all of those kind of things that line up that maybe Villanova having to win at Madison Square Garden to win the Big East tournament, to get to the NCAA tournament. I'm not saying it's going to happen. It's a long shot. Villanova has certainly struggled this year. But if there is a team that fits that mold, I would say my vote would fall in the Villanova column. All right, Big Ten, Rocco.
Well, Ohio State's the one to watch. In my view, they're at least 2 wins away from getting into the tournament. They play Iowa first, as Brad mentioned earlier. Absolute must win. And then waiting for them in the next round on Thursday, if they do win, is Illinois, who's playing really well right now. Last couple of weeks, they've been right back on track. Obviously, Illinois is a team maybe to watch to win the whole thing. If Ohio State can get by Illinois, that would leave quite an impression, I think, with the committee. It would help with their records, obviously. At some point, if Ohio State does not win the Big Ten tournament, which they're going to need 5 wins to do, they will end with another loss. So they're going to need to stack as many wins as they can get in this thing. So we'll see what kind of energy they bring on Wednesday. That first day usually tells you a lot if a team's going to make a run or not. And then lastly, you got Indiana. So Indiana, we're on their side for now, and they play Oregon. So it's another upside. They get to play, in Indianapolis against a West Coast team. It's a nice draw. They actually played them really well just like a week and a half ago. But if they lose to Oregon, it's not a bad loss, but they're adding another loss. It makes them 4-13 in quad one. We already saw Oklahoma last year, Paul. 4-12 in quad one got left out. So there's going to be even more reasons to leave Indiana out if they can't beat Oregon.
All right, and then the SEC, Brad.
Yep. SEC, Arkansas against South Carolina. We talked about it earlier. You want to avoid losing that game. I know Arkansas just got blown out at South Carolina, so losing twice to them in the final week of the season would be a problem.
Yeah.
So an important game for Arkansas to win that. And I think if they beat South Carolina, they should be fine. Texas and Vanderbilt. Vanderbilt safely in the field. Texas must win. And I think Texas needs to beat Texas A&M in the second round too in order to have a shot. Other than that, the final game, Oklahoma and Georgia. I think Georgia's safely in the field now. Oklahoma could do itself a favor, knock off Georgia, feel much better about their chances for an at-large bid. Because if they lose to Georgia, they're going to be sweating it out on Selection Sunday.
And then I will leave this up to either one of you. Any non-Power 5 teams, I know we've talked about the Big West teams. Is there anybody else maybe that we haven't talked? VCU, we haven't talked about VCU much at all yet. I think that's one thing we should probably hit on here before we wrap up the show.
Yeah, absolutely, Paul. VCU is a cliffhanger at this point. I'm not quite sure what to do with them. We didn't have to deal with them today because they still are our projected A10 champion because they are the number 1 seed in their tournament. But the reality is they did not get a win against a team above the bubble unless Dayton gets in. but Dayton would probably have to get in as an AQ. We'll see how that plays out. So they do have 2 quad 1 wins, but they're barely quad 1. St. Joe's, Dayton, so it's not really moving the needle. They have a Colorado State win that's really interesting, but they have that quad 4 Seton Hall loss. Sorry, Dagan, but it's there. And they have 4 losses in quad 2. So, I don't like them as much as the UC schools, either one of them, due to that, because both of those teams have high-level quad 1 wins at the top of very impressive road profiles. But VCU, you could argue over maybe like a Xavier if they lose, or an Indiana if they lose. So they're very interesting. I think they're very good. And it's unfortunately they don't get the opportunities, but it is what it is. So between VCU and Dayton, they're both really close. I think the bad news for the A10 is they don't have anybody in the room. Nobody from the A10 on the committee. That could be a problem.
All right, fellas. Last thing to do before we wrap this up. Rocco, I know you're out in Vegas right now. You'll be at the games tonight. Anything you guys are watching? Charleston plays the CAA. Semis are tonight. That should be a fun one. Anything else you guys are watching tonight? Pretty light slate on a Monday.
Troy, Arkansas State should be a war. I watched the last game. Troy went into Jonesboro and popped them, and now they're rematching for all the marbles in Pensacola. We've had the Stairway to 7, Paul, for 7 days. 7 days and 7 nights, and it all comes down to the Red Wolves and the Trojans, baby. So this is going to be a hell of a game tonight. They're going to get after each other. You might see some technical fouls. You might see some overtimes. I think that's going to be the best game of the night by far.
Brad, what are you watching tonight?
Well, of course, the Southern Tournament Championship between Wofford and Furman. Battle of 2 teams. The number 1 seed did not advance in that tournament, so it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. Every conference championship is always amazing. And then, of course, the Horizon League semifinals with Oakland and Robert Morris. Robert Morris won the Horizon League regular season after, a tough number, a few years in that league. But I'm curious to see if Andy Toole could advance to the championship and win that conference tournament on his way to another NCAA tournament bid.
Fellas, another great Fielding the 68 here this afternoon. Always great to talk to you, Rocco. Enjoy the games tonight. Everybody watching, listening to this, it is Conference Championship week. It's one of the best weeks of the season, and we will have you covered here on the Field of 68. So there's going to be a bracket revealed on socials every day, and then there's going to be a show on Wednesday, Friday, and Sunday at 5 o'clock. That show will be right before the bracket is revealed. So on Sunday, and then again, Wednesday and Friday, you'll have shows right here on the Field of 68 to kind of update everybody and keep you in the know for what you need to know for Sunday afternoon. All right. For Rocco, for Brad, I'm Paul Fritschner signing off. This has been Fielding the 68 presented by Rhythm. Enjoy Conference Championship.